The Koffler Gallery is proud to present the world premiere of a heart-wrenching and fascinating exhibition, The Synagogue at Babin Yar, Turning the Nightmares of Evil into a Shared Dream of Good. Opening on the eve of Yom HaShoah, April 17th, and running until November, the multidisciplinary exhibition tells the bittersweet story of the Babin Yar Synagogue, which stands on the grounds of the first large-scale massacre of the Holocaust in 1941. Experience the full historical, political, artistic, and spiritual context of this incredible monument for the first time. The exhibition is free of charge. To learn more, visit kofflerarts.org.
Well, Flavius, this is where the murder took place.
Yeah. Hey, wait a minute. Who's that suspicious-looking guy over there with the ugly face, the shifty eyes, and the low forehead?
You're looking in the mirror.
Nice-looking boy.
Yeah.
All right, Brutus.
That's a scene from Wayne and Shuster's biggest comedy hit. It's called Rinse the Blood Off My Toga, and it was their adaptation of William Shakespeare's classic play describing the assassination of Roman Emperor Julius Caesar, but with a sort of New York gangster twist. Johnny Wayne and Frank Shuster were Canada's most famous Canadian sketch comedy act. They got their start in the 1940s at a high school in Toronto and later at the University of Toronto. During the Second World War, they went overseas and entertained the troops. And when they came back, they shot to stardom, first with CBC radio programs, then CBC television specials. They aired for decades until the late 1980s. Some people describe their brand of comedy as literate slapstick, which makes sense since they were English majors. They spoofed popular culture too, including Star Trek and The $6 Million Man, even the House of Commons in Ottawa. And while you can still find a bit of their classic sketches here and there on YouTube, the bulk of their television work is still in the vaults of the CBC. Johnny Wayne died in 1990 and Frank Shuster died a decade later, and for years their children have been trying unsuccessfully to persuade the CBC to either rebroadcast their father's material for a new generation of fans to enjoy, or license it to somebody else to do it. To date, the CBC has not agreed. The reasons why are complicated, and so the families are now trying another route. They've teamed up with a theater company in Toronto to launch a new live Wayne and Shuster stage show using old printed radio scripts for which they do have the rights. And some pretty high-profile Canadian comedians have signed on to the project, and it opens May 25th.
They were everyday people, and they defended the people of Canada. It's like Frank said he wanted to do it for the blue-haired ladies in BC, and my father always said, I want to do it for the poor guy in Saskatoon that needs a smile and a laugh.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Thursday, May the 4th, 2023. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, sponsored by Metropia. Wayne and Shuster's legacy has been honored in many ways, with a star on Canada's Walk of Fame, induction into the Canadian Comedy Hall of Fame. They won a Genie Award for Lifetime Achievement, and there have been other posthumous tributes too, including most recently in Stratford, Ontario, and by the Toronto Jewish Film Festival, and the City of Toronto even named a lane after them. All the more reason, their families say, for Wayne and Shuster's famous shtick to be seen and heard again. Joining me now are Brian Wayne. He's a retired producer from CBC's Hockey Night in Canada. Michael Wayne, the oldest son, is a retired history professor from the U of T. Rosie Shuster is Frank's daughter. She's a comedy writer who also worked for Saturday Night Live, and she's in California. And the producers of the new live show are also here. They're Emily Dix and Connor Fitzgerald of Toronto's Bygone Theatre.
Thanks, Ellen. Thank you.
It's great to have you all together and great to interview you. It's an honor to have you here. So I'm going to open it up to anyone to start about how this whole idea got started.
I was talking to a bunch of university kids a little while ago, and it came out that my father was Johnny Wayne of the comedy team of Wayne and Shuster. And they said, who? And I said, comedy team like Crosby and Hope. Who? Like Martin and Lewis. Who? Burns and Allen. Who? okay, the Smothers Brothers. They go, who? And I said, listen, they were a great comedy team from Canada that was on television for a long time. And they said, oh, like Key and Peele. And I said, who? And so it became apparent that people didn't know Wayne and Shuster very well, the new generation. So we were lucky that we managed to talk to the people from Bygone Theater. And we said to them, is there any way that we can sort of bring back the comedy of Wayne and Shuster back to the younger generation? And they're very gratefully that Connor and Emily grabbed the ball and ran with it and started getting to produce sketches based on the comedy of Wayne and Shuster.
So you approached them, or Connor and Emily, you approached the family? How did this match in heaven happen?
I would say it was sort of both in a weird way, because I think the first contact I had was with Michael, because I was doing a school program at Schulich School of Business. And I think Michael and possibly Brian had approached the school to have an intern to try to find out how to license and how to get some of the original shows back on the air. And I was in law school and doing my MBA, so they thought that I'd be a great fit. So I was introduced to Michael on that project. And basically, it was through those initial conversations with the school and Michael, and then being introduced to Brian and Rosie, that we really started thinking about how important this is for Canada, and how fantastic the material is, and how it's just not being used. So this was sort of also a way to just forget about spending thousands and thousands of dollars to license it and get it on the air, but to still share it as a first piece.
And we both knew who Wayne Shuster were. I remember watching, I guess probably like repeats and VHS and stuff with my grandpa when I was little, but I was very excited.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, what was very encouraging talking to these two younger people is that they watched a lot of the Wayne and Shuster stuff, and they said to us, hey, this stuff is pretty funny, and it stands up even today, and we would really they encouraged us to do this, because they said we would like to be able to bring this stuff to a new generation and back to the older generation, because people still tell us, we used to watch your shows when I was a kid and we really liked it. So it was nice to see. And I think this does really transcend all generations.
What do you think the challenges are of making sure that it doesn't offend people the way, because that would be cancel culture, do you know what I mean? So how do you navigate that?
That hasn't really been an issue. That was something we talked about early on, was neither of us had any memories of anything that would be offensive, but we've gone through a lot of stuff and we're like, is there anything that's going to seem inappropriate? And I haven't come across anything. It's something as a company that does older shows, we're acutely aware of. But I don't think that was the kind of humor they were doing. They did a lot of stuff that was based off of really highbrow concepts. And I don't think you as often find offensive things in that, because there's an actual joke to it instead of let's just pick on some type of person. And I think that's part of why it still works today too. There's some little references that are, pop culture things that maybe people wouldn't get, but the gist of them is based on Shakespeare baseball. Anybody who knows Shakespeare is, and you don't have to know them well. Stuff with Sherlock Holmes. Everybody gets the sort of gritty crime drama and knows some basics about Julius Caesar. Yeah, I guess it's just they took inspiration from things that were already so canonical that it's the same stuff we all know today.
I'd like Rosie and Michael to weigh in on that question about the timeliness of the material.
Well, some of it is classic. So classic is classic. It's any time. And I don't even mind that there's a bit of dated stuff. That this is this is historical. I personally find that kind of interesting, even if it's not in my reference. I kind of can figure out, what it pertained to back then.
Michael?
Being a historian, I also agree that we would like to see things as they were seen at the time, so that we can understand what it says about the period in which they were made. I would also like to point out, we'll get to this, I'm sure, but I've heard from people of different backgrounds. I have a colleague at the U of T whose family is Italian Catholic, and they all had to be around the TV to watch Wayne and Shuster on Saturday nights because it spoke to them. I have a friend who's Muslim from Northern Ontario, and their family had to be around the TV to see it all as well. And that's so special to us that our parents, our dads, really wanted to say to people in Canada, you're all part of this country. It's not, well, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant alone. It's everybody who's here.
That's interesting that you mentioned white Anglo-Saxon Protestant because they were Jewish. And I wonder, maybe you can tell us, was there any restriction on what kind of material, Jewish material, they were allowed to use, or was there any pushback on them sort of putting Jewishy characters or Jewishy stuff in?
I think there was a built-in sensitivity not to be too, Catskill, Borscht Belt, that they didn't want to schmaltz it up. They wanted as wide, and this is coming out of the Second World War, of course, that shaped them so much. So there was a sensitivity about not to lay it on too thick. They had little winks to their Jewishness for those who understood.
Did they experience, you mentioned the war, and I know they served in the war, but as entertainers, I wrote about it. Our audience probably knows it. They're in my book about the Canadians who served. Was that a seminal influence on their lives, being overseas under fire? How impactful was that on them?
That was very important and tough to them. I know when he learned, his father had actually gone to Ottawa prior to the war, when the war had just started, I guess, when there was the ship that was coming from Germany to
the MS St. Louis,
and begged and pleaded with the Canadian government to let that, and that was my grandfather, whom I'm named after. And he begged the Canadian government to allow the ship to land. And of course, they didn't send it back, and they sent it back. And so he was greatly affected by that. But what he always used to say, he said when he was performing, they were the only two people that was shot at from both sides.
Yeah.
And he did do jokes, winks and nods to my grandmother, and he'd sort of give us a little nudge when he used some Yiddish words and things like that. And he said, that one's for Booby.
Yeah.
I mean,
one that I remember is that maybe it was the Brown Pumpernickel, but they walked past these huge barrels, and I think my dad threw out, the new dills are in, just, he knew who would appreciate that.
Right.
Did they experience anti-Semitism in their careers as they navigated their fame?
I think they were very aware of the CBC being very Gentile predominantly in its makeup. It wasn't United States show business, where there were a lot more Jewish people. So they were very aware of it. And I think they tread softly.
They wanted to, because they looked on themselves as really uniters of the country, and they wanted to, I think they sort of rose above that, and they really wanted to ignore it, that they were aware of it, because he would discuss that with us from time to time. But he wanted to say that it was important that he became and they became a unifying force in the country, especially after the war, because it was a new time and a new era for Canada, and they really felt that they were part of creating a new Canadian culture of unity, and I think they did a pretty good job.
Can we go back to something that you raised earlier? I guess I'll ask all of you, and that is the difficulties of the fact that someone else holds a lot of the copyright or the licensing of this valuable cultural material, and it's stuck there. Can you elaborate a little bit about this challenge and what you would like to see happen, if possible?
I would just perform knocking my head against the wall. That's my addition.
Maybe I'll do a bit about what I've gone through in the last 2 years, having this has been my focus through law school, and then now working with Canadian Heritage. I've been learning deeply about copyright and some of these challenges for Wayne and Shuster, but also for other cultural property that we see. And obviously there's two big parts to it. One is that, of course, just legally speaking, we have this system of ownership that we abide by, and it benefits artists for years and years. It get two, the older materials, sometimes they didn't think forward about how the rights would be used. So sometimes there just aren't agreements in place. So people just won't know how they can use it, even if they wanted to. And that creates this weird mishmash of rights that are available and not available, and people who are scared of using it, even for commercial purposes. So it becomes really challenging to sort of navigate that area. I think there's a bigger question in Canada when it comes to rights, and especially rights to things like Wayne and Shuster, about how impactful they are for our heritage. And I think that's a really big moral question that we have to ask ourselves as a nation, about whether or not there's some reason, apart from this legal reason, to share these stories with the nation. Because I think it's important we've been talking about how it grew Canada as a culture, and comedy especially is a massive part of our culture. And a lot of people, as we've been talking about, haven't even been able to be exposed to that, to know that we have that, that we've grown with that. So there's the legal aspect of it that's muddy and weird and hard to navigate. And then there's that other moral aspect of it that we're combating too, with what should we just have? What belongs to Canada?
Well, and it's sort of a funny thing that some of their work is at the National Archive. So there have been people in the government who've decided, oh, this is important, this needs to be preserved. But going the extra step to be like, well, what's the point in keeping something if it's just locked away? I think Canada does that a lot of the time, is we can realize this is something important that we need to keep, but finding a way to grow and continue to share the parts of our past that are good, while also encouraging new things. It's like we get kind of afraid of that and say, well, this happened before, and so we don't want to look too closely or question it or anything. We're just going to say, yep, and put it aside. So,
but it's also the case that the CBC has the film of their shows, and it's quite simple. The CBC can make them available, or they can't, or they don't want to.
UJA's Walk with Israel is happening this Victoria Day, Monday, May 22nd. Join thousands of community members for the world's largest Israel Solidarity Walk, followed by an epic Israeli-themed beach party to celebrate Israel's 75th birthday. Get all the details by visiting walkwithisrael.com. This is our moment to unite as one strong and proud Jewish community. Religious and secular, left and right, Jews and allies, everyone belongs at the Walk with Israel. Register before May 19th, and if you use the promo code CJN, you can save 10% on all Walk Bundle packages. To register, visit walkwithisrael.com.
Who in the world of comedy now, and this is the personal thing, and I'm throwing it at you, I didn't give you a chance to even think about it, would you say would be somebody that, or some group maybe, that sort of channels Wayne and Shuster today, or a comedian they would have liked?
Their form of sketch comedy was so I would have to think about that for a long time.
In terms of who they like, honestly, tough to tell, but I do know growing up, when they were growing up, they loved the Marx Brothers, and of course Jack Benny was probably their favorite comedian growing up. Now, in terms of who they liked after that, recently.
I just remember once my father was at Saturday Night Live, and Michael O'Donoghue, who wrote very, very dark, edgy kind of stuff. And my father, and this one was like shoving hot needles in your eyes. It was an impression of someone. And my father just looked at me and he was so sad. And he said, "Is this what the kids find funny today?"
All right. Well, that's a really good segue to my last question, which is, will the kids find this funny today? And how are you going to portray it in your piece in May?
I think they will. I think there's certain types of comedy that are, you can't say universal, but are spread over different generations. This has already proven that it has. Everyone I've met who's 40 and above gets so excited. It's a bit more hit and miss with people younger, but it's even now getting to the point where people who watched the 80s specials as children have children who are old enough to be watching it, right? My father grew up watching it. My grandfather, I wish he was still around because he was a huge fan, right? So you're looking at people born from 1930 to 1989 who all enjoyed the same thing. And I guess it goes back to what their overall subject matter is. I like vintage things. I like old stuff. I know not everybody does, but this doesn't feel dated. I think it feels classic. And there's some sketches you could put on, and I don't think anyone would know that they're as old as they are. Like the rinse the blood off my toga.
Yep, the jokes hold up no matter what. And I also think when I see the combination, because it's satire and it's clever and it's deep comedy, but then you have interspersed in it these goofy, fun moments that are just funny because they're just goofy.
Lots of mugging, lots of little
Flavius Maximus, Private Roman I. What do you know about this?
I told him, Julie, don't go. Julie, don't go. I told him, but no, he wouldn't listen.
Hello, Mrs. Caesar.
I pleaded with him, don't go. If I told him once, I told him 1,000 times, Julie, don't go.
Yeah, Mrs. Caesar.
But would he listen?
How meaningful is this to the three of you after all these years of pushing and trying to get the name revived? I mean, I know that it's on TV somewhere in Australia, and maybe there's like a random YouTube video here and there that people can sort of watch, but really it's been kind of crickets for decades.
Right.
It's only on radio in Australia, not TV.
It's a beautiful perk. I mean, it's fabulous.
It is.
I know that in one of your families, we have to say this, that the name Johnny Wayne has not been lost to history. Do you want to tell us your nice news, Michael?
Well, my daughter Beatrice, named after my mother, has a son whose full name is Johannes Markian Lane, but they call him Johnny. Her husband, Lars, was quite open to her having Johnny having the last name Wayne. So there you go. We have a Johnny Wayne who's now a little over 2 years old, who will be enjoying his great-grandfather for some time.
Beautiful, beautiful. Listen, it's been really an honor to speak to you all. Thank you so much for being on the CJN Daily, and I can't wait to come see the play.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Ellen.
The new Wayne and Shuster play opens on Thursday, May 25th at Hart House in Toronto. Only 4 shows. The kids will be there too for a meet and greet. You can check the link in our show notes for tickets and more information. We've also put links in so you can watch the Rinse the Blood Off My Toga skit on YouTube. I would love to hear your stories about memories of Wayne and Shuster, so write to me at ebessner@thecjn.ca. And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia, integrity, community, quality, and customer care. Today's listener shout-out goes to Izzy Steckler in Montreal. He was one of the people who won a copy of David Matlow's new book by guessing the correct answer to our skill testing question from our Israel at 75 quiz. If you missed that episode, we still have 3 more books to give away, and we'll end the show with Wayne and Shuster's famous Shakespearean baseball game, where Johnny Wayne plays a slumping catcher and Frank Shuster plays his team's manager. Enjoy.
Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, should gaze upon the record book and find that he has 10 games hitless gone? Oh, cursed fate that I, who led the league, should now bat 208. A hit, my kingdom for a hit. Once more, to hear that welcome crack of bat upon the ball, and then to run from first to second, then to third, and then to dig for a home. To slide. Aye, there's the rub.